Okay, we all had to go to the bathroom before we got up here, just so you know. So if you're over 50, that's what happens to you. But go ahead. Go ahead, Teana.
Well, it is the crypto boomer panel, right?
Exactly. There's a combined 500 years of experience.
Is that how we define boomers? Is over 50?
I don't know. No, probably a little later than that, 64.
I think it's 1965, yeah.
Yeah, 1965.
Yeah. I just want to clarify that I'm a Gen X, so not a boomer.
I'm Gen X. I count as Gen X.
Okay, good. Well, we need a Gen X meme.
That's fake news, okay, just so you guys know.
Well, I am delighted to be joined today by these crypto boomer titans of our industry. Everyone knows who they are, and if they don't, you already should. I'm not going to waste time with introductions, but I will ask each of you to give us your crypto rabbit hole moment. So when did you realize this was going to be transformational? Kevin, let's start with you.
I'm going to say the seminal moment for me was when I saw the Canadian regulator issue an order that allowed for an ETF with the underlying asset being Bitcoin. Not a derivative, the actual asset was Bitcoin. That to me said, okay, here we go. Because I've always considered, and this is a personal opinion, that the SEC and the OSC work in tandem, and that basically Canada is a petri dish for testing ideas. And one of the big concerns about an ETF with Bitcoin, would it have huge tracking error? Would there be issues around the volatility of the actual ETF price? And if there was a 20% correction in Bitcoin, which happens all the time, that ETF has performed flawlessly. And I think it should set up for licenses issued stateside. Same with Ethereum, same idea. And it allows retail investors to invest without having to go through the whole crypto crap. So it was a seminal moment. I said, now I got to get involved.
Jeremy, what about you?
Yeah, so I mean, I started getting really interested in crypto in 2012, and kind of just reading about it, studying it, and then I think in early 2013, basically when I started using Bitcoin and sort of experiencing what it was to like directly hold a digital asset and synchronize a blockchain onto my machine. My background is out of sort of internet infrastructure, so I was looking at this as an internet infrastructure. Basically, at that point, it was very clear to me that like this fundamental innovation was going to kind of restructure the possibilities for how the entire global financial system worked. And I got very interested in how one could build on top of what that was. And so, yeah, it was early 2013, and I think the idea that captured my imagination was mostly people were talking about how you could issue an asset on top of the Bitcoin blockchain, how you could make it possible to write more complicated financial contracts through smart contracts. Those things were not things you could do on Bitcoin, and it's only now becoming possible. But the basic belief as I sort of went down the rabbit hole, as it were, was, wow, this is going to be enable people to build kind of protocols on the internet that are similar to the kind of protocols that we have for information and data and communications, but you're going to be able to do that for dollars, and you're going to be able to make those dollars programmable, and that will allow you to basically restructure all of finance and commerce and the way all that works. So it was, at that point, and I would say, synchronizing the Bitcoin blockchain on my laptop at the time was like the equivalent of downloading NCSA Mosaic in September 1993, which was like, holy cow, I can't believe this.
Yeah.
So basically, that kind of thing.
Anthony?
So a little bit different. I actually, prior to my disastrous career in the White House, which lasted 11 days, not 10, so everybody knows, I was actually at the XM Bank. I was working as the chief strategy officer there. And I walked into a meeting, and there were two Treasury officials talking to XM bankers about the digitization of the US dollar. And I looked at those people, and I said, wait, how are you going to do that? And they said, well, we're going to do it over the blockchain. And at a prior SALT conference in Las Vegas in 2014, the Winklevoss twins had come to the conference to talk to me about Bitcoin. And I said to them, it seems like a really good idea, but I'm an institutional investor. I'm sort of we didn't use that term back then. I'm a traditional finance person. I'm not going to get any of my clients to be able to buy into this. And then those two thoughts converged. Here's the Treasury Department talking about dollar digitization. Of course, that was 5 years ago. It didn't happen. And it got...
Wait a minute. It did happen.
Well, you happened. We're going to talk about that. you happened, but the government didn't do it. Somebody more important, I think, because I think it's better for a private sector company to do it than for the government. We can talk about that. But you did it, but the government was talking about it. And so I was like, okay, I got this wrong. I've got to go back and do some more homework on it. And of course, I got fired, I don't know, maybe a month later. Okay, so then I went and got to I went to GoDaddy. I bought SkyBridgeBitcoin.com. And I said, okay, I've got to get up to speed on this. And then as I started to get up to speed, I said, okay, wait a minute. I can't buy this until it gets to 100 million wallets. Because if it gets to 100 million wallets, I'll know from Metcalfe's law and everything that we've discovered in the internet, it'll reach escape velocity. I think it'll, highly likelihood if you get to 100 million wallets, it'll go to 1 billion wallets. Can I store it safely? And then Fidelity, NYDIG, others, Coinbase had safe places to store it. Because if we're going to put 9 figures into it, I've got to make sure I don't get it stolen, the Mt. Gox hack, all those different things. And then the third thing, we had to make a decision on regulation. And this is where Kevin comes in. That's what Kevin said. That was his seminal moment. My moment was, is it going to be outlawed? And when the IRS made the decision that Bitcoin was intangible property, I went to law school. I only learned 2 things in law school. The first thing was don't be a lawyer. I thought that was the most obvious thing. But then the second thing I learned was about property. Ultimately in the United States, here in the West, in the Bahamas, anything tied to British common law, we hold property sacrosanct. I said, okay, if this is property, they are never going to outlaw. They're never going to be able to outlaw. There's too many checks and balances in the system. And so those 3 things converged, and we made our first Bitcoin investment, I guess, in October of 2020. So we're a little late, but I still think it's very early.
We're all still early.
I still think it's very early, but I could have gotten there earlier, but I was being more programmable about it and more institutional.
Well, we're glad you're here now.
I appreciate being here. It's been a lot of fun.
So we talk a lot about what's keeping institutions out. The custody was a big challenge some years ago. Regulatory clarity has been thrown around, and now we are seeing people, institutions allocate assets. And it looks to me like it's into trading infrastructure, market making, fiat on and off ramps, and there's some limited investing into the actual crypto assets themselves. So from a Wall Street perspective, it really seems like the first 2 areas, there's comfort and not as much comfort with investing directly into the assets themselves. So I'd like to know from each one of you why you think that is. I mean, we know that there's customer demand and there's appetite. Is it that they don't know how to risk assess? Is it they're unsure of the value? What's really that inhibitor?
This is a great question and also a great opportunity simultaneously. And I'll take a stab at it from the point of view of an indexer, a guy who provides sovereign wealth and pension plan services. And if you're a country with a lot of oil, for example, and you want to invest in the S&P, you ask indexers like me to create an indice that is X oil, X airlines, and you just invest in that. And so it's always based on allocations, typical sovereign funds. And the reason I bring up pension and sovereign, they are the investors. I mean, for all the excitement about Bitcoin, nobody owns it. I mean, it's a nothing burger asset in the context of sovereign and pension wealth. 800 billion is nothing. I know that sounds trite, but it's true. And so the way to get this asset to be a part of the real investment world is to get it regulated. Any of these assets, pick one. I personally would like to see stablecoins regulated first because it's easier to do that. But whatever happens, we need regulation because then here's why this works. So you want to have a 1% weighting in a $100 billion fund. A fund like that would have no more than 20% in any one of the 11 sectors of the S&P and no more than 5% weighting in any one stock or bond. That is a classic diversification strategy for long sovereign wealth, where trillions and trillions of dollars live every day. And so they would like to have 1 to 3% in Bitcoin. It's the one they want to start with. It's the granddaddy crypto. It's the one that's the biggest opportunity and the one that, frankly, the managers understand because it's been in front of everybody since the beginning of cryptocurrencies. If we get that regulated, they'll start putting on 50 to 100 basis point weightings. And then what you'll see happen, besides increased demand, you'll see less volatility because when you have a 1% allocation, it sells down you buy back to 1% by market close. And of course, crypto is 24/7. So they'll buy it back up to 1%. If it exceeds, if it jumps and doubles in price, they'll sell it back down. But they are the market. They are the bid forever. And everybody else benefits from the fact that the stability and the volatility is reduced dramatically. And the price will be significantly higher over time if, Mooch is right. And this is a property, they'll allocate it like they do real estate. And they could, in the context of crypto, go up to 20%. And I personally believe that crypto in the next decade will become the 12th sector of the S&P because it is so strong a potential for reduction in fees, transparency, auditability, and just better financial services globally that it'll make its way there. But it can't happen until somebody starts to regulate it. Now, good news, we've got the Loomis bill, we have the Haggerty bill, we've got the Toomey bill, we've got bipartisan effort. I think all three of us have been to the Hill multiple times to talk to these senators, to talk about give us the code, regulate it, and then when that happens, Katie, bar the doors. Watch what happens. I think it's that simple.
I have a few thoughts here. I think a couple different angles on this. I think one is most investors, just the concept of a digital commodity is a really hard concept to grok.
Yeah.
And so just like the idea that I'm going to own a digital commodity, I'm going to invest in a digital commodity, like in some ways to a lot of people that just feels like an oxymoron. What does that mean? And so, I think there's just not a lot of understanding. I think people have a conceptual model for Bitcoin, but clearly, in crypto, the investable assets are incredibly broad, and blockchain-based digital commodities like native tokens, other things. That's an extraordinary kind of asset, and I think over time there'll be a greater understanding. I completely agree in terms of like the structure that's needed to allow markets to participate in this in ways that work from a regulatory perspective. That's like totally necessary at that level. But I also just think fundamentally, like if you ask an investor, how do you think about valuing Apple or Tesla, or how do you think about valuing this oil and gas company? They can give you an answer. At least some people can give you an answer. If you ask someone to say, how do you value Ether, or how do you value the Near token, or whatever it is, it's very hard for them to give you an answer. Yeah. And that just reflects that digital commodities are not well understood. The last comment I'll make is the definitions here are really an issue. There are no statutory definitions of digital assets. And so that is a huge gating factor. If everyone thinks, I don't know what these are these commodities, are these securities, are these currencies, what are these, how are these classified? That's a huge gating issue. And so whatever ultimate resolution here is there has to be statutory definitions of digital assets. Countries like the Bahamas, Bermuda, many other countries have begun to do that, but that has to be done. And that I think when that happens, maybe different agencies needed to regulate it ultimately, but because these don't cleanly fit in the regulatory structures that we have today.
Well, to follow what Kevin was saying, that taxonomy issue that we have when we're looking across all the different bills that you mentioned, there is a different definition for stablecoins in all of them, right?
For sure.
And so every agency is looking at this differently. And I think one of the things that we saw from the executive order was this intention to have a more whole of government approach in how we're looking at and classifying these assets. Anthony, anything to add on that?
First of all, your shirt looks amazing in HD. I'm a size large, okay? So I just want to get one of those before we leave. I mean, who knows what's going to happen to my fashion going forward. But anyway, as it relates to this big question, I think the rate limiting step, the gate opener, will be the Bitcoin Cash ETF in the United States. Because what ends up happening is you've now forced every traditional financial services organization to have a Bitcoin Cash ETF in its arsenal when they're talking to their clients, whether it's institutional clients or individual clients. I don't see a private banker going to a pitch where a family or a man or woman entrepreneur made $100 million and they're going into the pitch and the person says, well, what's your digital asset strategy? And now this stuff is legal in the United States. And the person says, well, we don't have one, we don't like it. And my CEO said it was worthless, and Warren Buffett said it was rat poison squared, and so forth. So once that happens, you're forcing everybody into the pool at the same time. The second thing is, this is always it's going to come from the retail investor into the institutional community, right? Because institutions get paid not to get fired, and they don't want to look stupid. And so Fidelity's made a decision. This is the future. They have $2.4 trillion of assets in the RIA space, the 401k space. And some of us on this dais are old enough to remember what Fidelity did to stocks and the mutual fund market in the 1980s when the 401ks first came into place. It was an explosive market, and I think they're about to do the same thing for Bitcoin.
For sure.
Those two things are going to force everybody into the pool at the same time. And I think these prices that you're seeing right now, people are going to look back and say, yeah, that was a sloppy market. There was a war going on. There was inflation. Why didn't I step into that sloppy market and start buying this stuff?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. One of the things I wanted to also kind of talk a little bit about is that retail perspective, right? So this market has started in retail and moving into institutional, which is a little bit in the reverse in some other types of asset classes. And so we're seeing narratives around the move from Web3 or Web 2 to Web3, what's the build out of new financial market infrastructure, stablecoins creating a new payments rails system that's faster and cheaper and more transparent. Do these theses or do these themes weigh into investment theses, or does anybody care? Do we just want sophisticated ETF products?
Me
Yeah.
first. I think they matter a great deal. I think what Jeremy's doing is revolutionary, and I'm good friends with Bob Diamond, who made an investment in the company and helped you SPAC it, I believe.
Yep.
And Bob has been around the banking industry forever. He was the CEO of Barclays. Jeremy is doing something, similar to the old wire transfers. The Fed didn't create the wire transfer, right, Jeremy? That's what
Right.
Bob says. But once the Fed understood what the banks were doing, these wire transfers back and forth with each other, they decided to regulate it and put a federal reference number on it. He has the opportunity to be the standard. He has the opportunity to be on each of our phones where we're walking into a store and they're going to accept something based in US dollars, and they plug into Circle and you get a USDC transferred over the phone, and it becomes this wonderful delayering mechanism. And I want the government out of that, Jeremy. I don't want the government in that business, because I don't want there to have that oversight and that quote unquote authoritative control. Mayor Suarez said something the other night, which I thought was brilliant. He said, well, the Russians and the Chinese, the Russians are starting to like it now because of the war, but neither of them really like Bitcoin. And most autocratic and authoritative nations don't like Bitcoin, but the Chinese like a governmental-based digital currency. So therefore, definitionally, we probably shouldn't like it, okay? We want to still be free, and we want to be free market-oriented and capitalist. So I think what he is doing is going to be monumental, and he's going to have a terrific legacy over the next 30 or 40 years.
So Jeremy, yeah. So let me follow up on that. So Circle is starting to look a little bit like a bank. It's starting to look a lot like true financial market infrastructure. From a Wall Street perspective, how are you like a bank and how are you not like a bank? What's the balance between public money and private money?
I mean, I think, if you look at the internet and how major industries got changed, the communications industry, the information industry, the media industry, the software industry itself, right? There were kind of highly regulated, mostly closed loop, centrally controlled infrastructures that then got replaced by essentially decentralized infrastructures built on open intellectual property and open standards, and then new utilities got created. We don't even think of those utilities as the equivalent of their legacy system version. So we don't think of Facebook or Tencent as similar to AT&T as communications, even though they dominate communications in the world. They don't even operate a telecommunications service. They just publish software on the internet. So I think, just coming back to this, as we think about what we're doing, we're obviously building market infrastructure. We want that market infrastructure to be open and accessible so that any developer anywhere in the world can build on it and integrate it and build out standards around it so that people can connect that into what they do. And so I think we think of what we're doing as more like we're building platform infrastructure. And we're building that platform infrastructure for developers, for companies that are building commercial and financial applications, game developers, whoever it is that wants to connect and use dollars on the internet and program those in interesting ways, we're trying to provide the infrastructure to do that. That's not similar to the way like traditional banks work. And I think that's ultimately gets to the bigger piece here, which is that once you get to a world where there's protocols for dollars on the internet, and you can use those at the speed of the internet, basically at zero cost, and those become programmable, it will unlock use cases and scale that is far, far in excess than what we've seen in the legacy financial system. And so I think, in many ways, what we're building and the infrastructure we're building will lead to, things that look very, very different than, whether it's bank transfer networks or credit card networks. I think those will look like, we'll look back at those and be like, I don't even know what that is. Just like no one's asking when's the last time you sent a cross-border email? Like some of these concepts don't make sense, and I think as this kind of infrastructure is used and people build on it, it will just look radically different, and especially at scale. And just like there's probably a 1,000,000x increase in the amount of text content published in the world after the web, or a 1,000,000x increase in the amount of communications that happen once you could do it instantly for free. There's probably going to be like a 1,000,000x increase in transaction volume in the world because of blockchain, stablecoins, things like that.
Absolutely. Kevin, from your perspective, how important are the use cases? So we're moving away from this pure speculation period and building things now that are tangible. Is that important as an investor?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a real case study that happened last week that I think highlights why we need to get to what Jeremy's talking about. I do a lot of transactions in real estate in different geographies, and they're large transactions. And so generally what happens, you're going from one geography in US dollars to another geography in another currency. And so you have to transfer that money and to that new geography, then you have to FX it into the local currency, then buy the real estate. So last week we did and this bank is a large global bank, don't have to mention the name because the story's not nice, and we transferred millions and millions of dollars to its corresponding bank in another geography. They lost it. They lost the money for 48 hours, jeopardizing the closing of this transaction, and our team went out of their minds, including the Fed number, and they found it about 12 hours before the transaction was supposed to close, and they said, it was a back office error.
What people don't realize is that the money it's just like comma delimited text files that are floating around FTP servers. That's actually the money.
It wasn't. I looked at because I'm going to put in a formal complaint. We have a strong relationship with this bank. They owe us a lot for what happened. Yeah. I spent, even before the wire went, 18 minutes listening to a clerk read disclosure statements to me, which is a complete waste of both of our time. And I realized this is insane. This is before they lost it. And then we spent about 35 hours of staff time trying to find the money in their system. And I actually called one of the board members of the bank and said, have you ever heard of USDC? Have you ever heard of a stable coin? Do you know how it works? And have you done any work to try and figure out? Because this is commonplace. This happens all the time. It happens with smaller amounts, but when it's a transaction this size, they owe me interest for 48 hours on millions of dollars, and we're going to fight about that too, and some kind of penalty I should impose to maintain our relationship after what they did. But the point is, that board member doesn't know anything about this. And those bankers got to get hip to this stuff because they're going to get smoked if they don't provide service at some point.
Great. Yeah. Let's give that a moment. All right, so we're coming up to time, but I want to switch quickly to Wall Street and politics.
Okay.
So,
all right, I'm leaving.
Time's
up for me.
You know a little bit about politics and the dynamics between Wall Street, the administration, Capitol Hill. You recently launched a super PAC. I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. There's some really potentially exciting candidates that are, running in races where there's no incumbent, so that's some opportunity there. Mm-hmm. But also, we have some people in our Congress in the US that just don't or can't get their arms around this technology, and some really great people that can. So I want to ask you, from your perspective, how can we as an industry, I spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill, just like all of you guys do, what can we be doing to better represent ourselves, especially when you look at the amount of influence that Wall Street already has?
Well, the first thing I would say is politics is very humbling, and I've been obviously on the wrong side of things, and I've been humbled in many different ways. And I would encourage people that when they're talking to politicians to speak humbly, and don't lose sight of the fact that whatever you think about them from watching CNN or Fox or MSNBC, they are human beings too, and they've got their own set of issues, and they're all trying to figure out what to do. Most of them want to stay in power. But some of them really want to do the right thing. And so for me, this has never been about left or right. It has always been about right or wrong. And I'm interested in finding solutions-based, consensus-oriented, where we have to compromise, less tribal, less dividing politicians. I'm looking for people that recognize in the United States the first name of the country is united. And so whatever our differences are, we have to figure it out. We have to get it together. And so the PAC, the GMI PAC, which I'm a small part of, I get a lot of publicity for it, but what I would say we want to do is we want to educate these people as much as we possibly can to get them up to speed. We wish they were here. We wish they were present. We wish we could sit with them and explain to them what's going on. I see Christine here in the front, who runs the SEC effectively here. We had dinner last night. I heard her speak about the Bahamas, and I heard her speak about the ideas about what they're doing from a regulatory perspective. And in my mind, I want to bring her to the Hill. I want her to meet with these politicians to understand how the Bahamas is going to be at the forefront, and it's going to be a financial center of the future as a result of really good policy people in the Bahamas. Yep. And it's less partisan. It's more solutions-based. It's more about right or wrong. And I think that's the purpose of the PAC. I'm sorry I'm being so long-winded about it, but this is a huge issue for us guys. This industry, we have to collaborate with each other, not be competitive with each other. We have to lift the boat of the entire industry. And we've got to get these people to pay attention. And there's 73 million accounts, or some number like that, in the United States that own digital currencies. We need to be almost like our own decentralized lobbying organization and force these people into the swimming pool with us. And I intend to do the best I can to help that process.
I would, a couple of thoughts on this. I have been, so when I founded the company, one of the really critical things that I figured was like, there's going to be a lot of policy issues here. And like, that was like, duh. But I testified to the Senate for the first time in 2013. That was like the first public hearings on Capitol Hill on this, and have spent a lot of time not just in Washington, but in London and Brussels and Tokyo and Beijing and Singapore, a lot of places. And my attitude has always been, this is an education opportunity, that you should go in through the front door and you should spend the time to educate, like not just about what you're doing, like I'm educating, like here's what we're doing, here's our vision, here's how we're dealing with risks, be like open and transparent about the risks, because to say there aren't risks is ridiculous, because at the end of the day, policy is about risk management for society. And so be open about that, be thoughtful about that, and like demonstrate how you can solve those problems and be open-minded. And that's really the key, and it's not a partisan issue at all. In fact, I think crypto is probably amongst the most nonpartisan issues that exist today in the world. It's like saying the internet is a partisan issue, or saying energy technology is a partisan issue, which is it's nonsense. So my view is a lot of the work right now is there are a lot of people who are now figuring out, I need to have a point of view on this. This is real and it's growing. But for any given member of Congress, they have a lot they need to process and think about, and you get this much room in their brain to deal with this. And so I think it's really incumbent on this industry and people and everyone to just do the work to educate people. That's the most important thing in my view.
Kevin?
What I'm hoping from policymakers is to pick one thing and solve for that, then pick another thing. Because crypto is so broad and diverse, and there's so many assets, and there's so much debate. You know, an NFT is with utility, is that a security, is that a commodity, all those kind of things. Here's what I'd like to see happen, because for me the use case is so powerful, and it would also support the idea of maintaining the US dollar as a reserve currency globally. I'd like to, and I've read both bills, so I'm just giving you Cole's notes on what the Toomey bill and the Haggerty bill say about stablecoins. Not just USDC, all stablecoins. It's very simple. The Haggerty bill is 2 pages. Every senator can read 2 pages. And so the point is, they're asking for an audit every 30 days. What's wrong with that? Nothing. In fact, that would make you feel more confident about the asset. And secondly, they would like to have no underlying asset have a duration of longer than 12 months. No problem with that, right, Jeremy? That's not a big problem. And then just take that legislation and pass that one thing. Make that law for all stablecoins. Now, what would happen is, we all know that not all stablecoins are created equally, and if you're not willing to be exposed to an audit, then I certainly don't want to use you. You could still maybe go in a rogue environment, but I think that would immediately take, and in passing this bill, the regulator could say, we're going to license 10 stablecoins or 5 stablecoins and let them have little different attributes, just like a fund at Fidelity is a little different than Schwab or whatever, that's fine. But I don't want to see the government writing code. That's not what they're good at. Yeah. Let the private sector innovate with the legislation and let these stablecoins flourish backed by the US dollar. 100%. Why wouldn't we all want that? I mean, that makes a total amount of sense, and I wouldn't be getting screwed on my real estate transactions. That's why I want it. And so, because it's a use case, and it's a very powerful one, and a lot of people then could take the benefit of being able to lend their stable coins and make 3 or 4% interest versus 20 basis points. That means they're losing 5% because of inflation. There's a lot of merit in picking one thing and forcing that through policy.
And the good news is that is the policy issue that seems to have the most bipartisan support to address.
Yeah, and I think it's an easy use case. Everybody understands the value of a stablecoin. It's not as speculative. Its value after being audited certainly wouldn't vary that much. It would be the one thing. Now, we're not going to get any policy till the midterms are over, but that's not that far away. Then I think this bipartisan effort that Jeremy's talking about could get the one thing. Let's get one thing done. This sounds like one of those speeches back in the Apple days. One more thing. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same thing here.
No, and I think that it is something that you can attack on its own, as opposed to some of the other regulatory framework proposals that we've seen that are trying to kind of do a lot, right? So I agree with you. Those bills that are very focused and very specific about this one thing have the potential to progress, right? Okay, so in 30 seconds or less, with our last remaining minutes, do you think that DeFi is actually going to disrupt Wall Street, or do you think that there is a path where it's going to be complementary?
To me, DeFi should be defined as both centralized wallets and decentralized. It will be complementary. It will help these banks do their jobs better. It will create more competition. Fees will go down, more transparency, and definitely the ability to transfer capital between institutions much faster and efficiently. And it will squeeze out middlemen all over the place, particularly in FX trading, where there are savages and add no value, and I can't wait to put them out of business.
That's great. So,
Jeremy?
My view is that we're in the early stages of the invention of completely internet-native capital market structures. DeFi is the laboratory of that right now. I think that debt capital markets, for example, lending markets, for every real-world asset and every form of entity that needs to borrow, lend, form capital, is going to move to this infrastructure, and it's going to support a level of efficiency and access globally that is radically larger than what we have with the existing capital market infrastructure of today. So I do think it is going to absolutely transform. It will move capital markets from a Wall Street phenomenon to something that just exists globally as software on the internet.
Here.
So I would just draw some comparisons. We used to make long-distance phone calls and wait in phone booths, to get the AT&T operator when we were overseas. It would cost us $3 a minute in the 80s. Now you can make that phone call costlessly, yet the phone companies still exist. They adapted and they created these broadband pipes. If we were sitting here and it was 1998, we wouldn't have this HD definition, but we'd be up here. And we'd be logging onto the internet. We'd be going into Lycos or Yahoo or Alta Vista. It would whir and burr.
They don't know what that is.
Yeah, a lot of these people don't know what it is. I'm talking to the boomers that are out there. And it would take 35 seconds for your landing page to arrive, and it was an AOL landing page, and you were going to buy a book from Amazon. And what if somebody like Sam Bankman-Fried beamed in from 25 years later and was standing beside you at your fat box computer and said, hey, you know what? Someday we're going to stream to hundreds of millions of people 4K video around the world, right? And so I just want you to think about that. And that's where we're going. We're so early, sort of 1998 for Web3. And I'm very, very excited to be a part of it. Thank you so much. You did a great job.
Thank you.